record this. So we're going to see how these parts come together, but we're also going to look at how they work individually. There are going to be times that you speed through part of the process. There are going to be times that you just mentally go through the process. But these are the steps to the writing process that everybody should take. So the first part of this is what we call pre-writing. Pre-writing, we're going to talk more about each of these areas. Pre-writing and planning right now is where you guys need to spend the majority of your time. That's why the wheel is a little bit bigger. Pre-writing and planning can take an infinite amount of time. You can even get stuck in this. So my friends and I were writers. So oftentimes we get stuck and we have all of these ideas, but we never actually get them into the next step, which is drafting. So drafting is actually getting those ideas down. And then we have the revising and the editing stages. So let's talk about each of these stages one at a time and look at what we need to do in each of these stages. So the first stage is the pre-writing. So again, this is the big part of the wheel. So pre-writing is understanding when you are writing for a specific purpose, making sure that you understand the assignment itself. So one of the biggest mistakes that students make is I will give them an assignment and they will read into it what they do. So their answer or their response or what they give me is the wrong thing. So last term I had a lot of writing students and they had to write an argument. It had to be an argument over a debatable issue that they could change. 3 components there. They chose pro-con papers. They chose to do pro-cons. This is one side, this is the other side. That's not an argument. An argument is presenting one side and then dealing with the concerns of the other. They would give me things that aren't really debatable. So they would talk about child abuse is bad. Yeah, by nature, abuse is negative. So yeah, that's bad. Now, if they had said corporal punishment should never be used, that is debatable. That is controversial. And then they would give me things that couldn't be changed. So they would say the world needs to be peaceful. Yeah, but how are you going to do that? How is that going to happen? So the idea is that you have to understand your assignment. You have to understand what it is that you're supposed to focus in on. So remember how when we were annotating the passage, we were looking at words and concepts that were repeated. It's very similar to what you do with your understanding an assignment. But in understanding the assignment, I want you to focus on keywords or ideas that are repeated and the verb choice. So does it ask you to describe something? Does it ask you to respond to something, to create something? Pay attention to the verbs used and the idea or concept that's repeated. In addition to that, we want to start exploring our ideas. So oftentimes students will limit themselves by starting writing their paper right away. That's the way that we used to do it. We didn't have a lot of steps to it. You just went in there and started writing your ideas down. Writing your ideas out is one form of free writing if you just start writing. Sometimes we make a list. I personally like to use a web. The web concept is just easier for me because it's more visual. I'm also a list person, so I make lists of the lists that I need to make. I have like 5 or 6 different notebooks going at one time. Sometimes I'll transfer things. So whatever method of getting your ideas out works for you, use that method. Get your ideas out. We are going to be using a list for our assignment. So we're going to be looking at a list for our assignment. The next step is planning. So this is where you take that list that exists in some form and you start to organize those things. So you start to actually put those things together in a more organized fashion. So we're actually going to do this today together. And again, this is the process of writing anytime that you have to write anything. So this could be a paragraph, this could be a short response, this could be an essay. Anytime that you write, you use this process, or you should be using this process. So we go from this mess of ideas to something that's a bit more organized. When we are organizing, we're automatically going to start to eliminate certain things that don't fit. So over here, we may have a detail or major point that we think, oh, that doesn't fit over here. So we just eliminate it. We just get rid of it. Or maybe the wording over here is really rough, so we adjust the wording as we go over here. That's fine. Maybe you're over here and you have ideas and they're mishmashed, but over here you want to organize them. So maybe this is the first thing that happened, next thing that happened, then this happened. But over here, maybe it's first, then, finally, then. It doesn't matter. As long as you get it organized in some way, that is the planning stage. Now, does everybody do this step? Or this step? They do not, which is why when students come to me, so this actually happened, legit happened this in last term in writing 3. So students had to write their argument papers. So we did some planning, we did some pre-writing, and then we did some planning. Well, by the time we got to the planning, they started to realize, there's no research out there on this. There's nothing to match up with the assignment requirements. I don't have enough. So they had to go back to the drawing board. Well, their drawing board right here, it only had 1 layer. It didn't have a lot of ideas. So they had to redo the entire process because they didn't have enough ideas out there. So it's important that we get as many ideas out as possible because when we get to this organization step, we're going to start to notice some gaps. Those gaps are fine, but we have to eliminate those gaps. The next step is drafting. This step is the one that many students just worry about doing. They just think, I just need to have somebody else do it. My friend Tiffany, she just texted me and she said, want to make a quick $50. She's probably got a side writing job that she wants me to do because she just doesn't have time to. So she's going to get someone else to do it. But drafting, you just have to do it. You just have to sit down and you actually have to get it done. So don't procrastinate on this. Don't just let the fear or the frustration build up in you. You just have to get it done. So last term I had a couple of students who, they had their ideas out. They actually had really good ideas. They had research. But when it came to this, they just put up a block for themselves and they just didn't do it. They would waste time in the computer lab, listening to videos, watching videos, not doing their work. So just do it. So all you have to do, just get something on paper. Now for you guys, most of the stuff you do in here, you're not going to have to type. There will be some things that you do have to type, but you have to get something on paper because I can't work with nothing. So I have to have something together to work with.
Do you ever get lots of scratches on your draft? Because I'm always scratching stuff, even when I write, something simple down. Or I have the stuff in the margin where I'm taking a sentence out after I read it.
Yep, and that's really the editing step and sometimes the revising step. So here's what I want you guys to kind of take away from this. The revising step is really just looking at the content and saying, does this make sense? Does this work? Do I need to move this idea over here? Do I need to move this idea into this paragraph? Do I need to take this idea out? Does this idea work together with this idea? Do I have the appropriate sequencing? Editing is looking at those fine details. Editing is looking at the grammar, the punctuation. I can read your paper if you have spelling errors. I can read your paper if you're missing commas or you're missing semicolons. But if you don't have an idea together, I can't do anything with that. So you have to have the idea down, and it needs to be fairly clear, and then I can deal with the editing. You guys are not the experts in the editing, so leave that to the professionals. Any questions over the process?
Revising.
So revising is looking at the whole piece. So looking at the sentences, does this sentence work in this paragraph or does it need to go to this paragraph? Does this paragraph work here or do I need to move it to the 3rd paragraph or 4th paragraph? So it's moving whole pieces, whole chunks, not words or comma, the punctuation, grammar mechanics, not that stuff. It's the big stuff. It's kind of like a big overhaul. So that's why I've got my little construction guy. So think of it as a big overhaul. So let me compare this to something that makes me happy, food. So pre-writing is kind of like when you think, hey, I want to eat something. What do I want to eat? So when we're pre-writing, we're thinking about all of the requirements. We're thinking about who our audience is. When I have to decide, when I think I'm hungry, I have to decide, okay, well, who's in the house? And I have a big house of lots of people. So I have to decide, okay, who is here, who's not here. My husband is very, very picky. My kids will eat anything. They've eaten worms for $5 before. They don't care. They're cool with it. So it's like deciding what you want to eat. Let's say we want to eat cake. So planning is kind of like gathering all of your ingredients together. So it's like gathering your eggs and your flour and your favorite mixing bowl and kind of laying everything out. Our kitchen is very small. So when we cook, which my daughter and I do often, when we cook, we have to lay everything out. We have to plan where we're going to space everything out. We have to get everything together. What happens if you decide, hey, I'm going to eat a cake, I'm going to make a cake, and you run out of eggs, or you don't have eggs? You've got to go to the store. You've got to stop. You've got to leave everything there. You've got to run down to the store. You've got to get money. You've got to do so many things. So you need to gather your ingredients ahead of time. The next step, drafting, is like baking a cake. So you actually just have to get everything together. You have to mix it together, and you have to get it in the oven. If it sits there on the counter and your kids eat all the dough on it, or they eat all the batter, it's never going to get cooked. Revising is like icing the cake. So if any of you have ever baked before, what happens if you pull a cake out of the oven and then you try to put icing on it?
The icing melts.
The icing is going to melt. It's not going to stick. It's the same thing when you are drafting and you go right into revising. So students who are drafting and then they go right into revising, their brains are kind of on meltdown. They're exhausted, and they start filling things in that don't exist. So how many of you have ever seen those puzzles where all the vowels are missing, but you have to figure out the meanings of the words? Most of us can read it without vowels. We know it exists. So we are mentally filling things in. If you go straight from drafting into revising, you are mentally going to fill things in for yourself. So I suggest that you take a break. And when I say take a break, take a kinesthetic break. So that means that you get up, you physically do something different from being in that environment. So if that means that you go and make yourself something for dinner, make a cake. So maybe that means that you just go home, you take a nap. Whatever that means to you, you need to give yourself some time before you go back. Because once you go back and your cake has cooled, so to speak, then you're looking at it with fresh, clean eyes, so you can put the icing on the cake. The editing is like decorating the cake. So a cake is great. It looks really good with icing. It looks even better with decorations on it. But think of the decorating the cake like all those fine little details that I'm really good at. So I can make your cake look beautiful and flowery if you give me a nice cake. But if you don't give me a cake with any icing, we're just going to have to work on baking a cake. It's probably going to look rough. It's definitely not going to be that pretty. But we're going to have to work on just getting the basics down. If you just have a bunch of ingredients and you come to me and you say, I don't know what to do. Okay, that's where we're going to be working. So we have to work from whatever step you're at. If you are really good at all of this, then I might be able to tell you some really great color combinations on your cake. That may just be all you need. Maybe we need to spell birthday a different way. I don't know. We'll do something a little bit different. I'll help you with that. But it's a lot easier if you have all of these things together.
Someone on the counter office, you have to edit it. Are you
No.
going to edit?
No, I'm going to be editing the pieces that you guys give me, yes. Now, I would like you guys to be working on certain things, so we're going to be going over certain grammar concepts, and mostly we're going to be focusing on sentence structure. In looking over your writing diagnostic, you guys are in good shape for this class. You don't need to go back to English 2, so you're fine here. But that means that we're going to be working on sentence structure. So that means that you need to know subjects and predicates, or subjects and verbs. We're going to talk briefly about those things, but this class will really be about sentence structure more than it's going to be about those little details. We will also talk a little bit about commas and semicolons and colons. Oh my goodness, my son's speech therapist this morning. She was like, oh, I showed why you put a colon here. I said, oh my God. Colon does not go there, lady. Stop teaching my son the wrong stuff.
Does she know you teach English?
She didn't until...
You said that.
I didn't say anything about that colon. I had to say something later on because I was just like getting red and... I'm going to teach my kid, don't teach him the wrong stuff.
Right.
He already has issues enough, and he definitely doesn't need that help. So we're going to go over a couple of those things that I think could be helpful for you guys. I also know that when you guys do things like the ECA, so with the ECA, the more sophisticated your punctuation, the higher points you get on that section. So most of the time, if students use a colon and a semicolon correctly, that blows the rest of the stuff out of the water. So you could miss a couple of commas, but if you use a colon and a semicolon correctly, then most of the time that's going to get you your score, your 5 on that section.
I'm not good at punctuation like that.
Yeah.
And spelling.
We'll get there. We'll totally get there. All right, questions over the writing process, because we're going to be doing this. Like now. Okay, in a minute. Let's talk first about paragraph structure. And after we talk about paragraph structure, I'm going to give you guys a piece, and we are going to practice with writing a paragraph. So we're going to practice the structure with the process, with reading. So we're going to read a piece. We're going to go through the process, so that means that we're going to be talking about it, and then we're going to write a paragraph about it. So when we're writing paragraphs, there are a couple of things that you need to be aware of. Now, there are a few different formats, but remember that when we were talking about subjects and verbs, we ended up talking about nouns and verbs. We ended up talking about nouns are kind of like subjects, verbs are kind of like predicates. We have similar language that goes across the board. So sometimes it's called a topic sentence, sometimes it's called a claim. The first sentence in a paragraph needs to be the main idea of that paragraph. So this is just the main idea of that paragraph. What I want you to be cautious with is that first sentence needs to include only the things that are going to be in that paragraph. If it's not in that paragraph, don't put it in this topic sentence. If it's in the paragraph, it needs to be in the topic sentence. So this main idea is typically the topic plus your direction. So what you're saying about that topic, what it is that you're saying about that topic. So the next set of things that we need is to have support. Sometimes this support is called evidence. So this support or this evidence explains, or it shows, not explains, it shows why that initial claim is true. So it connects directly back to that claim. So the details, also called sometimes reasoning, explain that connection between the support and the claim. So it connects those two pieces. So let me explain this, or let me give you some examples. So if I said, my topic sentence, my claim is that cheese pizza is the worst pizza. So maybe my evidence is cheese pizza doesn't include any meat. So when I explain why that makes that the worst pizza, I could say meat is the staple of pizza. Now, do I end my paragraph? Is my paragraph over?
No, you need a conclusion.
Okay. We need a conclusion, but we could benefit from having more evidence. So if I say cheese pizza is the worst, and my first supporting point or piece of evidence is that cheese pizza doesn't have any meat. So I explain to you as my reader, I explain to you that meat is the cornerstone of pizza. So then I go on to say that cheese pizza usually has settled grease on top of it. That's my evidence. So then I'm going to explain that grease is usually soaked up by the meat in the pizza. So it's better to have meat on your pizza. That's my reasoning. Another example of this. So if I said that John is guilty of murdering Sally, maybe my evidence is that John had the murder weapon. Okay, well, he had the murder weapon that killed Sally, so obviously he did it. So maybe my other piece of evidence is that John confessed to murdering Sally. Okay. So I explain that since he confessed to murdering Sally, obviously he did it. I just draw the map for my readers. Why? Good question. And that's what I was getting ready to ask you. Why would I do that?
No, I'm talking about why was
John kill Sally?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe she ate his cheese pizza.
That's stupid. We don't mean on
No meat. That's what it was. She ordered it without meat on it. He was mad. So why would we need to draw conclusions for our reader?
So you can better understand.
Good. So we can lead them to the understanding that we want them to come up with. So it's a form of manipulating the language and manipulating the evidence, but it's what we need to do to get our point across. So we have to manipulate the evidence to show how it connects to that claim. So we have to draw those conclusions and not leave it in the hand of our reader. If we leave it in the hand of our reader is free to draw their own conclusions, which is dangerous because they may come up with something else. So if I said, I just left it with John had the murder weapon that killed Sally, well, as the reader, as the person who hears that, I may go, well, that doesn't mean that he used it on her. So just said that they have it. He had it. That's it. Didn't say that he used it. Didn't say that it came out of blood stain. Didn't say any of that. So I'm drawing my own conclusions. So you have to draw those conclusions for me as your reader, or I take that responsibility and I do what I want with it. And we may not come up with the same thing. So we repeat this pattern as needed. But these two travel in pairs. So these two need to come together. How many pieces of support and reasoning, how many do you need to have in a paragraph?
2?
How many?
2?
2? Maybe.
I don't know, say something. Go ahead.
Okay, 3, maybe. So the point of this is that you need as many as it takes. If I say that I have the murder weapon with his fingerprints, and I have his confession, 2 is pretty solid. But if I say, well, they knew each other. Oh, they dated once. She ordered his least favorite pizza. Well, I need more than 3. So sometimes you may need 5. Sometimes you may need 2. It just depends on if you have proven your claim to be true. That's it.
I think it was like no less than 3, but they're trying to
Yes.
get you ready
And
for this.
there are a lot of teachers who will tell you a specific amount. You can clarify that with whatever teacher you come across. Just know that for most of the standardized stuff, or for really good writing, there's not a set amount. You just really need to focus on what it takes to make it sound good. But know that these 2 things come in pairs. Now, the last sentence in a single paragraph is a conclusion paragraph. So what do we need to do in the conclusion paragraph?
Wrap it up.
Okay? So we sum up our main idea, or what we said. So we sum up the paragraph. So most of the time, this reflects the language from our main idea. Now I also have transition down here because later on, these body paragraphs are still going to be structured this way, but that conclusion will end. It will carry on into the next paragraph. So know that that's going to be something a little bit different later. So back here, you will also see this CER format. So it's the claim, evidence, and the reasoning. It shows you what those things are, and it just tells you a little bit more information. That is always back there, so feel free to refer to that at any point. It is helpful. It's missing the last portion because that will change based on the type of writing that you're doing. All right, questions over this? Not yet? Okay, are you ready to practice?
Sure.
Okay. Tim, do you have a question or you just... Okay. So remember before, when we talked about this passage, or we talked about this structure, so what we're going to do is read a piece, and as we read the piece, I'm going to ask that you guys practice with this structure. So I'm going to ask that you preview with the rest of us, so we all have the same foundation. And then I'm going to ask that as you're reading it, you take notes in the margins. They're paragraphed, so we'll do the first one together, and then we'll kind of go from there. So we read the title to identify the topic and what we know. So the title of this is What a Difference a Few Years Can Make, Mesopotamia. So what do you think this piece is going to be about?
Progression in Mesopotamia.
Okay, so maybe the progression of Mesopotamia. And how do you get the progression part?
A difference a few years.
Okay, so the difference that a few years can make is something that we see there's some kind of progress that's going on. So if you understand the way that this is phrased, then you're going to understand that this is about the progression of Mesopotamia. Good. So read the author. Do we have an author listed? No. So we get to skip that step. Pretty easy. Preview the entire piece. So we have a map over here, and it says Mesopotamia. A contemporary map of Iraq and the surrounding region showing Mesopotamia, literally between rivers. And then we have this statue thing, and we have some people at the top, or some stuff at the top. In bold, we have Mesopotamia, inhospitable, domesticated, So what do we think this piece is going to be about based on what we've seen? Mesopotamia, inhospitable, domesticated, got a map, modern day Iraq.
I would think that that would, be about peace. Isn't that what inhospitable? They're not hostile.
It's the opposite of that.
Is that?
Yeah,
close
it's
to-
the opposite of that. But you gathered peace from that. So you're already kind of dissecting the word and trying to figure it out. Good.
Domesticated means homes, like what people live.
Good. So domesticated, if you know what that means or you're able to figure it out, domestic means that from the home. Domesticated means making it from the home. Good. So we're probably seeing something about making things more peaceful in the home, maybe?
I was gathering with families over there.
Okay,
That's
good.
all I think. But I'm ready.
Good. So now is where we're going to chunk the information. So remember when we chunk the information, as we're reading it, we take notes. So we highlight things that are important. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, derives its name and existence from the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. These two rivers created the Fertile Crescent in the midst of surrounding inhospitable territory. The space we call Mesopotamia is roughly the same as that of the modern country of Iraq. So, Mesopotamia is already bolded, but what does Mesopotamia mean? That's what it means? So Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. So if we look at that, according to this, that means the land between the rivers. Remember when we looked at that map? What did that map say? What did the map say about Mesopotamia?
Literally between two rivers.
Literally between rivers. So the definition is between rivers. When people say, I literally choked on that salad, yeah, no, you didn't, or you would be reading right now. So literally means the actual definition. So it means between rivers. Good. Now what about inhospitable? So Alyssa knows what it means. Does everybody else know what inhospitable means?
It's not livable.
Okay. It's not fertile enough. Good. So it's not necessarily hostile, but it's not as productive. So it's not friendly. Good. So a little trick that I have when I don't necessarily understand words, which happens. Tigris and Euphrates, that's really not something that I would use. Those aren't words that I would use or necessarily be familiar with. So I make associations. So instead of saying Tigris, I would say it's the land between the tiger and the elephant. Tigris and Euphrates is close enough to tiger and elephant that when I have the option of that on a test, I'm going to remember it's between the tiger and the elephant.
Is Euphrates a god?
Is it what?
There a god, great god close to that Euphrates.
There are several that are close to that with the Euphrates. Yeah. So I know Tom likes to draw pictures like I do. So I wouldn't even write tiger and elephant. I would just draw a picture of a tiger and an elephant because doodling helps me remember information better. That's completely up to you. That is what is important from this passage. That is between it's between rivers and it's between the tiger and the elephant. Okay. So what I want you guys to do is annotate as you read this passage. So go through this passage and annotate, and then you're going to answer the questions on the back. So I'm going to give you guys, I'll give you guys until 10 after to do this and take a break. So you can take the break first and then come back and do this, or you can read this and then take the break. 10 after.